Zyphora was a planet like no other. Its purple skies stretched endlessly over its vast landscapes, a horizon broken only by jagged mountain peaks and lush, glowing forests. The air smelled of something foreign, fresh but almost electric, charged with the energy of a world that thrived on its own rhythm. Here, among the crumbling stone buildings of a forgotten city, Alex Carter lived. No one knew who he really was. To the Zyphorans, he was just another human mechanic, fixing broken ships and patching up engines with his skilled hands. But those who knew the truth, those who saw the glint in his eyes when he spoke, the way he moved with quiet confidence, understood he was more than he appeared. Alex had come to Zyphora years ago, far from the battlefields he had once fought on. After his service in humanity's elite forces, after the wars, the bloodshed, and the endless missions that had taken him to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, Alex was tired. His soul was worn thin, and his body had started to ache in ways that no amount of time could heal. So he fled here, a peaceful planet, far from the conflicts that had defined his past. But peace, as it often did, didn't last. Zyphora was on the edge of war. The invaders were coming. The transmissions had started weeks ago, cryptic messages from alien factions, whispers of an impending assault by an alien general named Zalon, a cruel and calculating figure who had destroyed entire civilizations before. The Zyphoran leaders, divided and weak, were struggling to prepare for what was coming. They had no idea how to defend themselves, and that's when Alex was asked to step in. It had started innocently enough. A request from Orax, one of the only Zyphorans Alex called a friend. Orax was a mechanic like him, but with more passion than skill. He had begged Alex to help repair the fleet of Zyphoran ships, old, rusty, and in desperate need of attention. "You're the best engineer I've ever known, Alex," Orax had said. "We need you. We need every hand we can get." At first, Alex had refused. He had no interest in being dragged into a war that wasn't his own. He'd seen enough of that. But when Orax came to him again, desperate, Alex couldn't ignore him. So Alex had reluctantly agreed to fix the ships. He had rebuilt engines, patched holes, and even designed new weapons systems for them, all while staying in the background. He was a quiet worker. No one knew of his military past. To the Zyphorans, he was just another mechanic. But as he worked, memories of the war he had left behind flooded back. The feeling of the battlefield was something Alex couldn't forget. The metallic scent of blood, the chaos of combat, and the decisions that could change everything in an instant. His hands, once trained to kill, now worked to save. It was ironic, he thought. Here he was, rebuilding the ships that would soon carry the Zyphoran forces into a war they had no chance of winning. And yet, deep down, he knew they would need more than just ships. They would need a commander. The night before the Zyphoran fleet was to launch its first major counterattack, Alex sat alone in his small workshop, his hands covered in grease as he tinkered with a broken console. Outside, the shadows of the alien city stretched long across the ground. His mind was restless. He had never planned on being a soldier again. He had left that life behind. But there was something about Zyphora, its people, its culture, that made him want to protect it. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, he felt like he could be more than just a soldier. He could be something else. The communication console in the corner of the room buzzed, snapping Alex from his thoughts. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag, and walked over to it. The display flickered to life, and a face appeared. A Zyphoran council member, his gray skin pale under the dim light. "Alex Carter," the counselor said, his voice urgent. "The final assault is coming. The invaders will strike tomorrow. We need your help. The fleet is ready, but we are not. Can you lead us? Will you fight for us?" Alex froze. Lead them? Fight. He was no leader. He wasn't even a soldier anymore. He was a mechanic, a shadow of the man he used to be. But then something inside him shifted. He could hear the desperation in the counselor's voice, see the fear in his eyes. These people needed him even if they didn't know it. Alex had always been able to read people. He knew what was at stake. "I'll help," Alex said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll do what I can." The counselor's face softened. "Thank you, Commander." Alex's heart skipped a beat. Commander, he hadn't heard that word in years. The memories of his old rank, his old life, rushed back to him. For a moment he was back in the trenches, back in the chaos of war. But then the moment passed and he was just Alex again. No rank, no title, just a man with a broken past and a chance to make things right. As the transmission ended, Alex sat back down at his workbench, his mind spinning. Tomorrow the invaders would come, and whether he was ready or not, he would have to lead them. Lead them with nothing but the skills of a mechanic, the heart of a soldier, and the will of a man who refused to let the past define him. But there was one thing Alex needed first, one thing that would help him face the chaos ahead. "Bring me my coffee," he muttered to himself, a small grin tugging at his lips. For in the midst of war, sometimes it was the simplest of comforts that reminded him who he really was. The city of Zyphora was on edge. The once peaceful streets now buzzed with the frantic energy of soldiers and civilians preparing for the war that had come crashing down upon them. The threat of the invaders was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was a full-blown reality. Outside, the sky had turned a sickly orange as fire streaked across the heavens. The fleet, once just a dream, was now their only hope. Alex Carter walked through the chaos, trying to remain unnoticed. The usual hum of his workshop, the quiet solitude of his work, felt miles away now. Everything was moving too fast. He passed by Orax, who was frantically attempting to coordinate the repairs of the remaining ships. The Zyphoran's typically calm demeanor had crumbled under the pressure, his 6 arms moving in quick, nervous motions as he barked orders to the workers around him. When he saw Alex, his eyes widened with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You're here," Orax said, his voice strained. "We need you now, Alex, the fleet. It's almost ready, but we need a leader. The council, they don't know what to do. They want you too." "I know," Alex interrupted, his tone colder than he intended. His mind was racing. He couldn't afford to get caught up in the emotions of the moment. "I'm not a leader anymore, Orax. I'm just a mechanic." "Not anymore," Orax replied, his voice desperate. "The council said." "The council doesn't know me," Alex snapped, cutting him off again. "I'm not the man they think I am, you know that." Orax's alien face contorted with frustration, his glowing eyes flickering as he tried to find the right words. "I know what you've done, Alex. I know who you were. You were a soldier once. You can lead us, please." Alex hesitated, staring at the chaos around them. The alien workers, the techs, and the soldiers, none of them had any idea who he really was. They didn't know the decisions he'd made, the blood he had spilled. He was just a human mechanic to them. To Orax, however, he was something more, a glimmer of hope in the face of an unimaginable enemy. "What do you need me to do?" Alex finally asked, his voice softening. "Everything," Orax answered, his tone urgent. "They want you to oversee the final preparations for the fleet. They want you to give them a plan. They want you to fight." Alex nodded slowly. He knew that the shipyards were the only place where they had any advantage. But leading them? That wasn't who he was anymore. The war had been long over for him, buried in the past. Yet here he was, dragged back into it. "I'll help with the ships," Alex said, though his heart wasn't in it. "But I'm not fighting on the front lines. I'm not leading anyone." As Alex made his way back to the shipyards, he was struck by how much had changed in such a short time. The once pristine ships now stood as symbols of desperation, their hulls patched together with whatever materials the Zyphorans could scrounge up. The engines, which had once hummed with precision, now sputtered and hissed, strained under the pressure of war. Alex worked through the night, coordinating repairs, fine-tuning the systems, and preparing the fleet for battle. The work was second nature to him, but even as he focused on the ships, his mind kept drifting back to his conversation with Orax. Could he really lead them? Could he still fight? The truth was, Alex wasn't sure. The man he had been, the soldier who had once commanded armies and led men into battle, felt like a lifetime ago. The weight of that past was heavy on him, but even heavier was the weight of the present. These people were depending on him. Orax was depending on him. He couldn't walk away. By the time the first light of dawn broke over Zyphora, the fleet was ready. But it wasn't just the ships that were prepared. The Zyphoran people had rallied together, putting aside their differences in the face of a common enemy. The council, desperate for guidance, had finally given Alex command over the fleet. Whether he wanted it or not, the responsibility was his now. He stood before them all, the ships lined up behind him. The Zyphoran leaders, all 6 of them, watched him expectantly, their eyes filled with hope. Behind them stood the soldiers, technicians, and civilians, waiting for a sign, a leader. Alex took a deep breath. This was it. He was no longer just the mechanic, the quiet man in the shadows. He was the commander, the one they had all been waiting for. "I know you've all heard the stories of the invaders," Alex began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything he had experienced. "General Zalon is ruthless. He's a tactician, a strategist, and he doesn't make mistakes. But that's his weakness. He's predictable. We are not. We can't be." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the gathered crowd. The tension in the air was thick, but Alex felt something else, something stirring within him. It was the same feeling he had felt in the past, the thrill of the fight, the clarity that came when everything was on the line. "I may not be the leader you wanted," Alex continued, his voice rising with a newfound confidence. "But I will fight with you. I will give everything I have to protect this world. And if we are going to survive, we will do it together. No one gets left behind." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Alex wondered if they would even listen to him. But then, a low murmur began to rise from the crowd. It grew into a cheer, a unified cry of defiance. The Zyphoran people, once fractured and unsure, were now united in their resolve. The sky above Zyphora had turned a deep shade of crimson as the first wave of the invader fleet descended, like harbingers of doom. The massive warships were a far cry from the makeshift fleet the Zyphorans had put together. They glided through the atmosphere with terrifying precision, their sleek, metallic exteriors gleaming ominously under the alien sun. Alex stood on the command deck of the flagship, the ship that was supposed to lead the Zyphoran forces into battle. The bridge was bustling with activity as technicians, soldiers, and strategists scrambled to make last-minute preparations. Alex had never been one for the spotlight, never one to wear the weight of a leader's gaze. Yet here he was, starring down the very same war that had defined his youth. The hum of the ship's engines was steady, but it did little to quiet the storm brewing in his mind. The moment he had dreaded had arrived. "We're ready, Commander," Orax said, his voice laced with anxiety. His 6 arms moved in rapid succession, tapping away at the holographic controls in front of him. "The fleet is standing by. The first wave of invaders is almost here." Alex glanced at the map projected in front of them, which showed the locations of the invading fleet and their trajectories. The strategy was clear, and the risk was high. They would have to hold their position, protect the remaining ships, and prevent the invaders from landing. I know, Alex said, rubbing his hand across his face. The exhaustion was beginning to set in, but there was no time for rest. Not now. He knew what needed to be done. Suddenly, the loud crack of gunfire echoed through the hull, shaking the ship. The alarm blared. Chaos was starting to unfold. Impact, the first barrage has hit our outer shields, one of the officers yelled. Alex's eyes darted toward the view screen, where the invading fleet was coming into view. Massive warships, each one bristling with weapons, surrounded a central flagship, a ship so large it seemed to blot out the sky. It was the flagship of General Zalon, the one who would stop at nothing to claim Zyphora as his own. The sleek, angular ship was designed for terror. Every inch of it was a weapon. "This is it," Alex muttered, a shiver running down his spine. "The first wave is here." Oryx moved to the side, checking his console. "The enemy ships are preparing to launch their ground assault pods. They're targeting the northern cities. We need to act fast or we'll lose everything." Alex took a deep breath. There was no hesitation now. The fear that had gripped him earlier was gone, replaced by something else. A focus, a determination that he hadn't felt in years. This was his moment. "Get me a comms link to all ships," Alex ordered. His voice cut through the chaos with surprising clarity. It was the first time in years that he'd given an order like that, and it felt natural. "All ships, this is Commander Alex Carter," he said, his voice resonating through the fleet. "I know you're scared. I know the odds are stacked against us, but I've seen worse. I've been through worse. This fight is ours to win, and if we stand together, we will send Zalon's fleet back into the void." The comms crackled, and Alex could hear the murmurs of the various fleet commanders and soldiers coming through. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, he was a leader. He could feel it now, deep in his bones. "Sir, incoming transmission from the invader flagship," the comms officer called out, his voice tense. Alex nodded. He had been expecting this. Zalon wanted to break their morale before the battle even began. He activated the transmission. The face of General Zalon appeared on the view screen, his cold, calculating eyes staring directly at Alex. His voice was smooth, almost taunting. "Commander Carter," Zalon said, his tone filled with amusement. "It's amusing how much hope you cling to despite the inevitable. You're a relic, a remnant of a war long over. You think your species can win against us. You are nothing." Alex's jaw clenched. He could feel the weight of Zalon's words. The invader general was trying to break him, trying to crush the morale of the Zyphorans, but Alex wouldn't let him. "I've seen men like you, Zalon," Alex replied, his voice steady. "Men who believe they can bend the universe to their will. But here's the thing, you've never faced someone like me. I don't follow orders, I give them." Zalon's eyes narrowed. "You are an insect and you will be crushed like one." With that, the transmission was cut off. The silence in the room was deafening. Alex turned to the crew, who were all staring at him with a mixture of awe and fear. "Prepare for battle," Alex commanded, his voice cold and unwavering. "We don't back down, we stand and fight, and we win." As the battle began, Alex was a whirlwind of action. He moved between stations, coordinating with Orax and the others, constantly adjusting strategies as new data came in. The invaders' ground assault pods began to drop from the sky, crashing into the northern cities and releasing waves of enemy soldiers. The Zyphoran fleet launched their counterattacks, firing everything they had at the incoming forces. But it wasn't enough. The invaders were relentless. Their ships were faster, better equipped, and far more numerous. Alex's heart raced as he watched the chaos unfold on the view screen. The first wave of invaders had been repelled, but it was only a matter of time before the second wave hit, and they wouldn't be so easy to defeat. In the midst of the battle, Alex received an urgent message from Arya, the human linguist who had been working with him behind the scenes. Alex, Arya's voice crackled over the comms. We've intercepted a transmission from the invader fleet. They're preparing to launch a secondary attack. We need you to disrupt their communications. Alex glanced at Orax, who was already moving to implement the plan. We can do that, Alex said, but it'll be risky. The invaders are ready for anything. Then we'll give them something they don't expect, Orax replied, his voice determined. The explosion had rocked the ship with such force that Alex was thrown to the floor, his head slamming against the metal plating beneath him. For a moment, everything went silent, just a ringing in his ears. When he opened his eyes, the world was spinning, the lights flickering, and smoke began to billow from the damaged sections of the command deck. Commander, Orax's voice cut through the haze, urgent and panicked. They've breached the hull. The invaders are inside. Alex scrambled to his feet, shaking off the disorientation. His body ached, his mind scrambled for solutions. They had no time to waste. This was the moment where all the decisions made up to now would either save them or doom them. Get to the armory, Alex shouted, his voice hoarse but commanding. We need to hold the ship together. Rally every soldier you can find. I want every man and woman ready to fight. We've got a planet to save. But even as he spoke, he knew the odds were stacked against them. The invaders had already proven their strength, and the defenses of the ship were failing. The enemy would be upon them soon, and without the element of surprise or the resources to defend themselves properly, their chances were slim. The ship groaned again as another blast shook the hull. It was as if the entire vessel was alive, screaming in agony. Commander, the secondary attack is happening now, Orax said, his voice tight with tension. They're sending in reinforcements. Alex ran to the nearest console and began quickly assessing the situation. The main corridors were blocked, the outer hull breached, and fires were spreading through the lower levels. The invasion had already begun inside the ship. For a fleeting moment, Alex considered falling back. This wasn't his fight anymore. He had no reason to risk his life for a world that wasn't his. But then he saw it, the image of the innocent Xyphoran children who had come to him for help days ago, their wide eyes full of trust and fear. He couldn't leave them behind. No, Alex muttered, clenching his fists. I won't run. I'll never run again. He took a deep breath. The battle was far from over, but the enemy wasn't the only thing they had to contend with. There was something else he needed, a moment of clarity, a moment to refocus. It was something simple, something that had always grounded him in the chaos of war. Bring me my coffee, Alex said, his voice almost a whisper, but with a certain kind of finality. It was an odd request in the middle of a battlefield, but it was exactly what he needed. Orax looked at him, puzzled. Coffee, Commander, now. Alex didn't look up from his station. Yes, coffee. I need to think clearly. You'll find the mess hall. I don't care what it takes. Get it to me now. Orax hesitated for a moment, confused by the strange command, but then, without a word, he dashed off. In the midst of all the chaos, Alex allowed himself a moment to breathe, his thoughts focused on that simple request. It had been years since he'd taken such a moment. The frantic, adrenaline-fueled rush of combat had always been a part of his life. He'd fought for so long that he'd forgotten the human need for stillness, for peace, for something as simple as a cup of coffee. A few moments later, Orax returned, looking exhausted but holding a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. You're serious? Orax asked, still bewildered. Alex took the mug from him with a quick nod, his fingers brushing against the warmth of the ceramic. He didn't drink it right away. Instead, he simply inhaled the aroma, letting the familiar scent bring some semblance of comfort amid the chaos. This was the moment he needed: clarity, focus, a small piece of humanity in the midst of war. Then, without a word, Alex took a sip. The bitterness, the warmth, the simple act of drinking coffee, it gave him a moment of normalcy, a tether to who he was before the war, before the chaos. For just a few seconds, everything else faded away. He could think clearly now. "All right," he said, setting the mug down on the nearby console. "Now we fight." The battle on the ship escalated as Alex led the remaining crew and soldiers in a desperate fight to defend their last stronghold. The invaders, relentless in their assault, had pushed forward, overwhelming the ship's defenses. But Alex, with his newfound clarity, became the leader the Zyphorans needed. He moved through the corridors, coordinating with Orax and the others, his military instincts taking over. They fought their way through the ship, securing vital areas, fighting tooth and nail for every inch of space. The invaders were everywhere: alien soldiers, mechanical drones, and terrifying war machines that seemed to come from the depths of nightmares. But Alex had learned something important in his years of service. When you have nothing left to lose, you fight harder than anyone else. As they reached the heart of the ship, Alex's thoughts turned to the enemy flagship, Zalon's pride and joy. He knew that defeating the invaders' leader would give the Zyphorans a fighting chance. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed to reach the command center where Zalon would be. "Get me a link to the rest of the fleet," Alex ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "We need to know what's happening outside. Are the other ships holding?" The comms officer scrambled to comply. "Yes, Commander, the other ships are holding, but they're losing ground. The invaders are relentless. The secondary attack is overwhelming us." Alex's mind raced as he processed the information. The Zyphoran fleet was struggling, but if he could take down Zalon, it could turn the tide. But the question remained: how? The flagship was heavily guarded, and every minute that passed brought them closer to defeat. "We need to cut off Zalon's communications," Alex said, packing back and forth. "If we can blind him, we can fight back." Orax looked at him, his face etched with fear. "It's risky, Commander. We don't know what kind of defenses they have in place. We're running out of time." "I don't have time to think," Alex replied, his voice hard. "We'll improvise. That's what we do. We take risks." The voice of General Zalon echoed through the ship's comms system, sending a cold shiver down Alex's spine. He had expected the invader general to show up in some form, but hearing his voice on every speaker was a different kind of terror. Zalon knew who he was now. Alex's hidden past, his military skills, everything he had tried to leave behind, Zalon had uncovered it. The mind games had begun. "Commander Carter, you've impressed me," Zalon's voice came again, calm and chilling. "But you can't hide forever. I know what you are, what you've done, and I will make sure you and your precious world feel every bit of your failure." Alex clenched his fists, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had no time for mind games. The invader was threatening his people, his friends, the Zyphorans, and he couldn't let Zalon have this moment of victory. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. "Do you hear that?" Alex said, his voice low but steady. He looked to Orax and the others gathered around him in the cramped control room. "Zalon thinks he has us cornered, but we have something he doesn't have. Humans don't give up, not when it counts." Orax nodded, his glowing eyes filled with a determination Alex had only seen in the most hardened of warriors. "We'll fight. Whatever it takes. But Alex knew something the Zyphorans didn't. Zalon wasn't just interested in brute force. He had something far more dangerous up his sleeve. The attack came swiftly. Alex and Orax, along with a small group of soldiers, moved toward the heart of the ship, where they would launch a counterstrike against the invader flagship's control systems. Their mission was clear: disable Zalon's communications and sabotage his ability to coordinate the invasion. It was their best shot at buying the Zyphoran fleet the time they needed to regroup and mount a defense. As they navigated the darkened corridors, the silence was deafening. The ship was under lockdown, and every hallway was a maze of twisted metal and flickering lights. The corridors were eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of explosions and the occasional hiss of the air vents struggling to keep the atmosphere stable after the earlier breaches. It felt as though the very walls of the ship were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. Finally, they reached the central control room, a vast chamber filled with blinking consoles, holographic displays, and towering machines that hummed with the power of the ship's operations. The tension was palpable. "This is it," Alex said, checking the tactical readout. "If we can get to the main terminal and take control of the ship's systems, we can block Zalon's communications for good. It'll blind him, give us an edge." Orax turned to Alex, his expression serious. "But what about the mind-control device? If it's true that Zalon has a weapon capable of controlling minds, we need to stop it first. It could be the key to everything." Alex froze at the mention of the device. He had heard rumors, whispers among the crew, but hadn't believed them. The invaders had a way of turning their enemies into puppets, controlling their minds, bending them to their will. If Zalon had this weapon, it could change everything. "Then that's our new priority," Alex said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We stop that device or this entire planet falls." As they moved deeper into the heart of the ship, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every creak of the floor, every metallic groan of the ship sent a spike of adrenaline through his veins. They were close. Zalon's forces were surely waiting for them. When they reached the control room's entrance, Alex signaled for the group to halt. He motioned for Orax to check the security feeds. There was a moment of silence as Orax tapped away at his console, his expression darkening. "They've blocked the entry," Orax muttered, his voice laced with frustration. "It's a trap, Commander." Alex didn't hesitate. "Then we break through, full force on 3. Orax gave him a sharp nod. 3, Alex said. They breached the door, charging into the control room, but what they saw stopped them dead in their tracks. There in the center of the room stood a massive alien device, gleaming mechanical tendrils wrapped around it like a twisted cage. At the center, glowing ominously, was a strange core, pulsing with an eerie green light. It was the mind control device. Alex could feel it. The very air seemed thick with power, as if the machine was alive and waiting. Before they could react, the lights flickered, and a deep voice echoed through the room. "Welcome, Commander Carter. I knew you would come, but now that you're here, there's something I need to show you." Alex's heart skipped a beat. It was Zalon, his voice reverberating throughout the room as if it was coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the very floor beneath them, seemed to hum with his presence. "You see," Zalon continued, his voice smooth and calculating, "this device doesn't just control minds, it can control you, all of you, every one of your soldiers, every one of your friends." Alex felt a sudden wave of dizziness, his vision blurring as if the very room around him was shifting. His knees buckled, and he staggered back, bracing himself against the wall. "Don't listen to him," Orax shouted, his voice cutting through the haze in Alex's mind. It's an illusion. The device's hum grew louder, and Alex's thoughts felt like they were being pulled apart. But in that moment, he remembered something, something that had always kept him grounded. His hand reached into his pocket, pulling out the small mug Orax had given him earlier. The simple act of holding it brought clarity, something familiar in the midst of the chaos. Coffee, Alex muttered, barely able to stand. Focus, Alex, focus. Suddenly, everything snapped back into place. The dizziness subsided and his mind cleared. He was no longer just a man caught in a trap. He was a soldier, a leader, a commander. And he knew what he had to do. Cliffhanger, as the realization dawned on him, Alex turned toward the mind control device with a new sense of purpose. He was ready to shut it down. But as he reached for the control panel, a voice, cold and terrifying, whispered in his ear. The voice of General Zalon slithered into Alex's mind, as if the very air around him had been poisoned. His body stiffened, the hairs on the back of his neck rising in warning. For a split second, he could almost hear Zalon's cold laugh, echoing through the room, taunting him from every direction. The mind control device pulsed louder, its green light almost blinding, like the heartbeat of some monstrous entity waiting to devour him. It's too late, Commander, Zalon's voice echoed again, this time sharper, more insistent. You've already failed. Your mind is already mine. Alex gritted his teeth, refusing to let the device take hold of him. He had felt this before, this sensation of being controlled, of being forced to obey against his will. But that was the past, and he wasn't that man anymore. Not now, not after everything he had fought for. The weight of his past battles, the lives lost, the decisions made, they all pushed him forward. Don't listen to him, Orax shouted, his voice desperate. Focus, Alex, you're stronger than this. Alex's mind swirled, the temptation to give in, to let go of the pain, the responsibility, the endless struggle was almost overwhelming. He could feel the mind control device sinking its teeth into him, pulling at his willpower. His vision blurred again, but this time it wasn't just the dizziness. It was something far more insidious, an assault on his very soul. But just as the darkness began to pull him under, something deep within him flickered to life. It was the memory of his old life, the brotherhood of soldiers he had once fought beside. It was the faces of the innocent Zyphorans who had trusted him, who were relying on him to lead them through this nightmare. And it was that moment, the simple, human moment of drinking coffee, that reminded him who he was. Focus, Alex whispered to himself, his voice shaking but resolute. You can fight this. His hand shot out, and with a final burst of effort, he reached for the control panel. The cold metal of the console felt like a lifeline in the sea of darkness that was swallowing him whole. His fingers shook, but his determination only grew stronger. Not today, Zalon, Alex growled, his voice defiant. He slammed his hand down onto the console, activating the shutdown sequence. The green light from the device flickered for a moment, and then nothing. Silence. The hum of the device died down, and with it, the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on Alex's mind. He gasped for breath, his head spinning, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he was free. But just as the relief washed over him, a new voice broke through the air, one that was even more chilling than Zalon's. Well done, Commander, said the voice, soft, cold, and all too familiar. Alex whipped around, his heart hammering in his chest. Standing at the entrance of the control room was someone he had never expected to see, someone he thought had been a friend. The alien spy, the one who had been feeding information to the invaders from the very beginning, stood there, grinning at him. It was a look of victory, but not for Alex. You, Alex spat, his breath quickening in disbelief. You were working for them the whole time. The spy's grin widened. Did you really think you could stop this invasion, Commander? You've been a pawn in Zalon's game from the start. I was sent to ensure you would play your part. And now, with the mind control device shut down, your role is finished. Alex's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not after everything they had been through. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a calculated strike to dismantle everything they had worked for. The spy was no ally. He had been a traitor all along. I should have known, Alex muttered under his breath. I should have known. Orax moved to stand beside him, his 6 arms shaking with anger. You'll pay for this, he growled. You betrayed us all. The spy's grin faded slightly as he stepped forward, his voice cold. I'm not the one who needs to be worried, Orax. You think you can stop us now? The invasion has already been set in motion. Zalon will destroy Zyphora, and there's nothing you can do to change that. You're too late. Alex's eyes narrowed as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. This was bigger than any single betrayal. It was a calculated move, a distraction to ensure that the invasion would succeed, regardless of what they did on this ship. But there was something the spy hadn't counted on, something Alex knew deep down. They had one last chance, one final opportunity to turn the tide in their favor. Maybe you're right, Alex said, his voice low but steady. Maybe you've won, but that doesn't mean we're out of options. We still have one thing you don't. The spy raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Alex smiled grimly. Hope, and the will to fight, that's what makes us human. Before the spy could react, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. Alex turned, heart racing. Reinforcements were on the way, Zyphoran soldiers, Orax's people, ready to make their last stand. But it wasn't just soldiers who had arrived. There, standing in the doorway, was Arya, the human linguist who had been working with Alex all this time. She was holding something, a small, portable device, and she wasn't alone. Behind her were a handful of Zyphoran soldiers, their faces grim but determined. They had found the spy. They had tracked him down. You're not getting away with this, Arya said coldly, her voice sharp with authority. You've lost. The spy's expression twisted in fury. You think you can stop us? Zalon's victory is already assured. You're nothing but fools. But Alex stood tall, his resolve hardening once again. He had faced worse odds before. This was just one more battle in a war he had no intention of losing. No, Alex said, his voice ringing with conviction. It's you who's lost, because you underestimated us. The explosion rattled the ship's core, and Alex's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze, the air heavy with tension. The lights flickered, the ship groaning under the strain as the invaders began their final push. This wasn't just a breach, it was the beginning of their endgame. Zalon had made his move. Alex, Orax shouted, grabbing his arm. The ship's core is unstable. We're running out of time. If we don't get to the main reactor, we won't be able to stop the countdown. Zalon's forces are preparing to launch the final assault. It's over unless we act fast. Alex's mind raced. He had always known the stakes were high, but this was beyond anything he had expected. The battle had shifted from a fight for survival to a fight for the very existence of Zyphora. There was no turning back. He looked at Arya, who had just finished deactivating the spy with the device. She was breathing heavily, but her eyes were clear, focused. We have one chance, Alex said, his voice low but resolute. We destroy the reactor or Zalon wins. We've already disabled the mind control device, but if we don't stop this now, we're finished. Arya nodded, her face set in grim determination. We're with you, Alex. Let's end this. The crew moved quickly, racing through the corridors of the ship with a sense of urgency that was almost palpable. The alarms blared, and the sound of invader footsteps grew louder. Zalon's forces were closing in, but Alex didn't falter. His training, his instincts, and the bond he had with his team all came together now. This was their moment. They reached the main reactor room. The doors were sealed tight, and the console was flashing red, indicating that Zalon's final assault was imminent. Alex wasted no time. He slammed his fist against the control panel, and the door slowly creaked open. Inside, the reactor hummed with a low, almost menacing vibration. It was the heart of the ship, a massive core that powered the entire vessel. If they could disable it, they could stop the countdown, and with it, Zalon's plans. The room was silent except for the hum of the reactor. The only sound was their breathing, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Alex moved to the central control panel, his fingers flying over the console, bypassing security systems, overriding protocols. But even as he worked, he could hear Zalon's voice in his head, taunting him. "You're too late, Commander. You've already failed." Alex shook his head. He couldn't afford to listen. He had to stay focused. He had to finish this. Outside the reactor room, the invaders were closing in. Orax and Arya stood guard, weapons raised, ready for whatever came next. They could hear the footsteps of Zalon's elite soldiers, their heavy boots clanging against the metal floor. "We won't let them through," Orax said, his voice steady. "Go, Alex, do what you need to do." Alex's fingers hovered over the console. The countdown was almost complete. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before Zalon's fleet would launch their final strike. He pressed a final command, and the console blinked red, signaling the last stage of the reactor's shutdown. The ship lurched violently, throwing Alex against the control panel. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness, only the faint glow of emergency lights cutting through the blackness. "Alex," Arya called out, her voice sharp with fear. He stumbled to his feet, wiping blood from his brow. The reactor was shutting down, but the invaders had already breached the outer perimeter. Zalon wasn't going to let them win so easily. The air in the reactor room became thick with tension as the door behind them creaked open, revealing the figures of Zalon's elite soldiers, armed and ready for combat. Alex felt a surge of adrenaline rush through him. This was it, the final confrontation. Orax and Arya opened fire, their weapons blasting with deafening noise as the soldiers advanced. But they were outnumbered, and the enemy was closing in fast. Alex knew they couldn't keep this up for long. "Get to the escape pods," Alex shouted to Orax and Arya, his voice urgent. "I'll hold them off." "No," Arya yelled, her eyes flashing with defiance. "We're not leaving you behind." "I'm not asking," Alex snapped. "This is my fight. You've done enough." With that, Alex grabbed a nearby weapon, a heavy plasma rifle, and turned to face the advancing soldiers. He wasn't going down without a fight. He couldn't. Not when there was still hope, not when Zyphora depended on him. The battle was brutal. The invader soldiers pushed forward relentlessly, but Alex fought with everything he had, using every ounce of his military training and ingenuity. Every shot he fired counted. Every move was calculated. He was a soldier again, no longer just a mechanic, but the commander he had once been. As the last invader fell, the ship shook once more, the final tremors of the battle echoing through its hull. The reactor had been disabled, but the fight wasn't over yet. Alex staggered back to the console, barely able to stand. His body ached, his head was spinning, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. He looked up at Orax and Arya, who were waiting for him, breathless but alive. "We did it," Arya said, her voice shaky with relief. "The reactor's gone, the fleet's been stopped." But Alex knew it wasn't over. Zalon was still out there, and they still had one last thing to do: take down the general himself. The invader flagship loomed outside, its ominous presence filling the viewport. But the Xyphoran fleet, though battered, was still standing. The invaders had been dealt a crushing blow, and now it was time to finish what they had started. Alex turned to Orax and Arya. "We're going to end this, once and for all." Final showdown. Alex and his team boarded the remaining Xyphoran warship, preparing for the final assault on General Zalon's flagship. It was a suicide mission. There was no doubt about it. But Alex had come to understand something deep within himself over the past days. This wasn't just about him. It was about the people of Xyphora, about the hope they had in humanity's strength. As their ship approached the invader flagship, Alex felt a strange calm settle over him. He wasn't afraid, not anymore. The last battle was fierce. They fought their way through the corridors of the flagship, fighting back Zalon's elite soldiers. But they were undeterred, their resolve unbreakable. When they finally reached Zalon's command chamber, the general was waiting for them, his cold, calculating eyes gleaming with malice. "Do you think you can stop me?" Zalon sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but insects. You cannot defeat me." Alex stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "We already have." In a final, desperate battle, Alex faced General Zalon. The clash was brutal, each blow ringing out like thunder. But Alex had something the invader general didn't: human ingenuity, resilience, and the will to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. In the end, it was Alex's unwavering determination that won the day. With a final strike, he defeated Zalon, shattering the general's control over his forces. A conclusion. As the dust settled, the Xyphoran world was safe. The invasion had been stopped. The ships that had once been a symbol of destruction now floated peacefully in orbit. The battle was won. Alex stood at the helm of the ship, looking out at the stars. The war was over. But the fight for peace, for trust, and for humanity's place in the galaxy was just beginning. "Bring me my coffee," Alex said with a grin, the familiar comfort of the phrase grounding him in the moment. And as the crew celebrated their victory, Alex knew that, despite everything, humanity's greatest strength was not just in their ability to fight, but in their ability to adapt, to endure, and to never lose hope. The galaxy was vast, and who knew what lay ahead, but whatever came next, Alex was ready, because he was a commander, and commanders didn't give up.